My name's Richard Sandell. My pronouns are he, him. I work with Cesare, who you all know, at the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries at the University of Leicester. And we're one of the founders of the Queer Heritage Collections Network and work across a range of projects. It's my real pleasure today to chair this next session. Our three groups of speakers are all online for this panel, and we are going to take them one by one and then come back together for questions and reflections. So we'll make a start now. I'll keep an eye on my colleagues at the back giving me the thumbs up. Our first speaker is Melissa Reeve-Rawlings, an archivist and heritage professional based in Glasgow and founder of the Bi History Project, which they're going to share with us today. So, Melissa, if you can hear us, it's over to you for your 15-minute presentation.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So yeah, I'm Melissa, and I'm an archivist based in Glasgow, and I run the Bi History Project. So today I'm going to talk a bit about that work. Bisexual plus people form a significant part of the LGBTQ plus community, yet our stories are often underrepresented or even erased. The Bi History Project seeks to address this by celebrating, preserving, and promoting bisexual plus history through research, training, and advocacy. Oh, sorry, I've just realised I've forgotten to share my screen. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? 2 seconds. There we go. So I've worked with a range of community archives, national institutions, with a focus on improving access to marginalised histories, and in particular records of the bisexual plus community. As a heritage professional, I'm also very passionate about how understanding data protection legislation can enable us to make our collections more accessible, particularly when it comes to marginalised histories. So today I'm going to talk about the work of the Bi History Project and share some thoughts and reflections around inclusive LGBTQ plus heritage practices, many of which I'm sure will be familiar to you, but with a specific focus on Bi plus histories. So the Bi History Project explores how Bi plus and LGBTQ plus histories can be celebrated and preserved through inclusive community-led practice. And our projects have focused on identifying and uplifting Bi plus narratives within existing collections, collaborating with communities to shape interpretation and representation, embedding Bi plus stories across both physical and digital heritage spaces, and experimenting with queering approaches to cataloguing and metadata, and also empowering heritage professionals and community members with an understanding of data protection legislation. And through this work, I aim to demonstrate practical ways of ensuring Bi plus and LGBTQ plus voices are celebrated and preserved. So while Bi plus people have always been part of queer history, our stories are often hidden, often even within LGBTQ plus records, and they can be mislabeled or even just simply unrecognised. And to me, recognising Bi plus history can mean looking differently at what we already hold as institutions, reinterpreting collections, questioning assumptions, and also seeking out voices that may have been overlooked. And as I've said, the Bi History Project aims to share these inclusive practices that we can adopt to embed Bi plus histories more fully and respectfully within our collections and interpretation work. But why should we give specific attention to bisexual plus histories? Bisexual plus people experience erasure in multiple directions, and this happens both in wider society and can even happen within LGBTQ plus community spaces. And this so-called bi-invisibility can lead to gaps in the record that heritage professionals, as stewards of our cultural memory, have the opportunity to address. So there's a key challenge when it comes to Bi plus archiving, and that can be recognising Bi plus history within records where the term bisexual is not explicitly used. Bisexual plus identities have often been overlooked or erased, even within LGBTQ plus history, because of a lack of labelling and also because of evolving language. So, for example, Historical figures and events may not fit neatly into a modern label, or someone may not have used a term like bisexual to describe themselves, but their experiences and the story within those records can still reflect an experience of sexual fluidity that a contemporary bisexual person would recognise as part of their community's history. Archiving bisexual plus history can involve recognising experiences of people who may not have identified as bisexual, but had those lived experiences that align with bi plus experiences. And I think what's really important is that recognizing bi plus history enriches our understanding of all LGBTQ plus history, because we're acknowledging the intertwined and fluid nature of queer experiences across time. And I think this approach emphasizes the importance of preserving and understanding bi plus experiences, even when the label is absent, to ensure a more comprehensive LGBTQ plus historical record. So it's not about going back and applying labels to people who didn't use those terms for themselves, but it is about recognizing the complexity of LGBTQ plus history and the bi plus stories within that. So as individuals working in the heritage world, we can ask whose voices are missing in the materials and records that we're handling, and we can reflect on whether our assumptions or categorizations may contribute to erasure. And we can be aware as well of where historical bisexual plus contributions have been overlooked. And a really great example that I often reach for in this is Brenda Howard, who I'm sure many of you will know. She was known as the Mother of Pride and was a bisexual activist who coordinated the first Pride March after Stonewall, and that led to the kind of event that we now know of as Pride Month. And I think it's a great example of how bi plus people and activism is embedded within LGBTQ plus history, but does often get overlooked. And there's an opportunity there for us to take the time to highlight it and celebrate it. So when stories and voices are missing from the archival record, I believe that the fullness and diversity of our queer history is diminished. And I think that archival practice carries a responsibility to recognise and at times address these gaps when we're preserving, curating, and providing access to collections. Every act of cataloguing, exhibiting, or interpreting records of LGBTQ plus history presents us with an opportunity to either reinforce bi plus invisibility or to challenge it. A really useful starting point is taking a fresh look at existing collections where we can revisit LGBTQ plus materials with bisexual plus themes in mind. We can also question using generic labels without fully understanding the stories within those records, which can lead to obscuring different experiences, including bi plus experiences. And of course, we can use inclusive tagging and description practices when we are processing collections. So even small actions such as updating a finding aid to highlight bi plus relevance can help redress this balance. And there is a rich history, as I've said, of bi plus people within LGBTQ plus activism, but this still gets overlooked. And again, as I've mentioned, the example with Brenda Howard, and I've also got a picture here of a UK example of bi plus activism. And this is a photo from the London bisexual group who were founded in 1981. And then on the right here, this is a collection that I curated through a series of workshops that now lives at the Bishopgate Institute. And you can access it there. And it's just, yeah, a small collection of bi plus records. But I think it's something that's really valuable for bi plus people and also researchers to be able to engage with. So community partnership is a big part of the work that I do with the BiHistory project, and at our Bi Plus archiving workshops. I've spent time with participants exploring how seeing themselves in heritage collections can be a really powerful act of connection and validation. And these workshops have provided opportunities to share knowledge and histories and collectively shape how Bi Plus stories are preserved and presented. And this collaboration has also encouraged dialogue about gaps in the archival record and the ways in which historical materials can be interpreted more inclusively. And I've encouraged attendees to reflect on how they would feel about records of their life being included in an archive collection and how they would judge what is important, and whether they would keep something in that context. And I think this really helped these bi plus individuals to identify what records of their life and activism they may themselves see as unimportant or ephemeral, or ephemeral, but which are really vital records of BI+ history. And I also encourage dialogues around the process of engaging with archival institutions, aiming to demystify this relationship and empower people outside of the heritage profession with knowledge on topics such as data protection to help them understand the responsibilities that archives and institutions have. So thinking about querying cataloging and metadata practices, I think we all know that traditional cataloging systems can sometimes fail to capture the fluidity and diversity of experience, including BI+ identities and how items are described, tagged, and classified. It gives us the opportunity to either reinforce erasure or promote visibility. And I've worked with institutions to reflect on bisexual plus presence within records and within finding aids and helping ensure that users can find those stories more easily. And something I often find myself reflecting on is if someone searched for BI+ materials in a system, would they find them? And if not, what small change could we make that would help that? And then something else that I think about a lot in this work is data protection. So data protection laws are a really important part of our work as heritage professionals, and having a strong understanding of them, I believe, empowers us to provide access to collections. And as archives, we have to justify data processing, and we often rely on the public task or archiving in the public interest basis rather than consent. But there are times, I think, where uncertainty or overly cautious restrictions can lead us to potentially limit access to marginalised histories. And I think having a strong understanding of this legislation and finding a balance between protecting individuals, as we have a responsibility to do, while also ensuring visibility is really important. So coming now to a recent piece of work that I've done with the BI History Project, I put together the BI+ Archive Atlas, and it's a recent initiative which aims to serve as a comprehensive living resource, bringing together digital archival records, including different publications, zines, oral histories, and other materials, all of which document BI+ lives. And it's intended to be regularly updated, reflecting ongoing contributions and expanding the knowledge that we have of BI+ history. And it aims to provide a really practical tool for researchers, educators, and community members who are seeking to explore and share BI+ histories. So if any of you do have records of BI+ history in your collections, or if you have a look at the Atlas and you can see anything that isn't included that you think should be, then we have a Google form that you can submit to. So it's very much community driven, has included a lot of resources that I've identified myself, but also that the community has come together to kind of put all in one place as a kind of basic finding aid to point out to other collections and collection materials which are available online as a really practical starting point for anyone looking into exploring records of BI+ history. And you can also find a free toolkit on the BI History website, which is designed to help archivists, heritage workers, and community groups create more inclusive, community-centered archival practices. And it offers practical strategies and guidance, and includes a section on handling personal and sensitive data using a care, consent, and dignity grounded approach. So in closing, as I'm sure we'll all agree, bisexual plus visibility is really important. And as heritage practitioners, we have the opportunity and responsibility to develop the confidence skills and networks necessary to embed BI+ histories in meaningful and lasting ways. And I think that by reframing our heritage through a BI+ lens, we enrich our collective histories and hopefully inspire inclusivity as well. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. And if you want to find out any more about the BI History Project, then you can visit our website or our Instagram. But yeah, thank you.
Melissa, thank you. That was fantastic presentation. I've got lots of thoughts and questions which we maybe come back to, but also thanks for sharing those resources and ways in toolkits. The Atlas looks absolutely incredible. So we're going to move to our second presentations, and I'm really pleased to welcome Aaran, Alison and Esther from Culture Leicestershire, the Queer Heritage and Collections Network. We fund a small group of creative projects, which you'll hear about a lot more at next year's Symposium, but we were able to run a development programme alongside that, and we took that cohort to see the exhibition, hear about the programming and the engagement work that Aaran, Alison and Esther have been doing out of Culture Leicestershire. Really, really fantastic and inspiring work, and we're really thrilled to have them here for this session. You may also have picked up, if you didn't, there should still be some postcards downstairs on the registration desk that tell you, and with links to more of the project that you're going to hear about now. So, Aaran, Alison and Esther, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen, bear with me. So there's three of us presenting today. I'm starting off. So my name is Alison Clague. My pronouns are she, her. My title is Senior Curator, so I work with the museum collections at Leicestershire County Council as part of Culture Leicestershire. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sort of background to the project. Esther will take you into a little bit more detail, and then we've got Aaran, who's going to talk about the community work that they did. Okay. So we had identified LGBTQ plus objects and stories as a priority when we reviewed our collections development policy in 2019. And we also gained Arts Council MPO funding, which had co-creation as a core principle. And as a local authority, we obviously have a commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion, a policy to support this, and a responsibility to reflect the lives of all the residents of Leicestershire. So we've got amazingly rich and varied collections, and we work hard to make them accessible in many different ways, but they are not necessarily the most representative of everybody's lived experience. And as with most museum collections, there is privilege in who has collected and donated items and who gets to tell the stories within them. The challenge of looking for LGBTQ plus connections and how we could represent these histories authentically was really challenging for us. I think we were quite afraid of misrepresenting LGBTQ plus people and of criticism from communities for not getting it right, I suppose. So we started to look at how other museums were approaching this and realised quite quickly that we needed to get some additional support and expertise. So we commissioned the lovely John Slee to do an initial survey of our collections. So his extensive knowledge and experience made us think about this work in a whole new way, really, with care and safeguarding for all participants and staff at its heart. So he really supported us to develop an ethical framework and encouraged us to commission some bespoke training for our services needs, which we did with Curious Art. So it was lovely to see Phil earlier. And most importantly, I think, John's warmth, care and wisdom to won hearts and minds through the organisation. That was really important in sort of getting people on board with it. So this is sort of the result of John's initial work. So he looked at our collections, sort of surveyed them, identified objects we might not previously have considered queer, like the Vivienne Westwood suit you see here, bottom right, or the Ladybird book of the policeman. So he worked with us to help create these groupings, which could act as provocations for future work. He was keen that LGBTQ plus participants could disagree with these selections, could criticise them, could make new suggestions. And although he was immensely excited to find we had a portrait of George Villiers, the first Duke of Buckingham, we had no plans at this stage for an exhibition to be the outcome of this project. Just another example of one of the groupings John helped us with. So we have our Simonson collection of corsetry and shapewear, which had potential for prompting conversations around self-expression and gender euphoria. This collection is usually seen as a resource for fashion students and designers, And the concept of queer potential has opened our eyes to how our collections do not have to be explicitly queer to have resonance and meaning. But the Villiers portrait was too good an opportunity to miss. So, we had this internationally known Leicestershire individual with one of the best known stories in British LGBTQ plus history. So we committed to making the portrait more accessible through conservation work and by making it the centrepiece of an exhibition that would have John's voice and lived experience at its heart. We wanted to start a conversation and invite a community response for a second phase of the exhibition. The front of house staff were included in the planning and training and championed the exhibition from the start. We made the toilets at the venue. They're now gender neutral as a result, and the team are keen to do more. They even made this amazing Villiers themed Christmas tree for the local Christmas tree festival. So the results of the first stage were better than we could ever have hoped. We've improved interpretation of an LGBTQ plus story that was hidden in plain sight that will endure beyond the project. It has given us confidence to continue this work and has spread beyond the museum collections team throughout the whole organisation. There is much more we can do in terms of collecting, reviewing our documentation and connecting with new communities, but seeing the transformation of our museum space at Melton and what is possible when we make a positive step has inspired us to continue this commitment to co-curation and change. I'll now hand over to Esther.
Thank you. So I'm Esther Shaw, she, her. I'm a community participation worker for Culture Leicestershire. And our second exhibition at Melton Museum reclaimed queer stories from global majority LGBTQIA+ communities. Co-creation was essential, from commissioning artists to research and design, fostering real partnerships. And artist Aaran, who you'll shortly meet, placed lived experience at the centre, enabling participants to reshape the narratives within our heritage. Next slide, please. We collaborated with the University of Nottingham's Digital Transformation Hub, involving 15 student volunteers as co-curators, and they selected and researched queer resonant artefacts from our collections that had been part of John Slee's groupings, and they used 3D photogrammetry to digitise them. And this partnership enhanced our curatorial practices, making them more inclusive and participatory, while integrating academic and artistic perspectives. And now I'm going to hand over to Aaran, who will tell you more about their involvement.
Thanks, Esther. Hi, everyone. My name's Aaran. I use they, them pronouns. And like Esther and Alison said, I'm the artist and designer who worked with Culture Leicestershire on the Villiers Revealed We Have Always Been Here, which was the co-created community exhibition exploring queerness, colonialism, and reclamation alongside local LGBTQ+ communities in Leicestershire. If we go to the next slide. So this part of the project really focused on expanding the story of George Villiers, whose queerness had largely been erased. But this was about connecting that hidden story to more broader global histories of queerness and gender fluidity worldwide, as a way to fill in the gaps, widen the story, and think about suppression more intersectionally. If we go to the next slide. So I think some context. When we're speaking about erasure in heritage, historically, particularly in a UK context, that can't really be separated from the countries that the West colonized and then exported these laws to. So Villiers lived under British laws and attitudes that criminalized queerness, and it was those same attitudes and laws that were exported worldwide through colonialism, which has led to the erasure of queer and trans identities that had long existed, so across South Asia, Africa, Indigenous America, and beyond. And this starts to tell the story of how the erasure Villiers experienced targeted queer and trans, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, which was born out of UK laws. And this has led to the erasure and underrepresentation of these identities today. And if we go to the next slide. So a little bit of what we did, the process of co-creating this exhibition centered on 4 creative workshops with local LGBTQ plus communities, which are about creating the space to explore these stories, think about our own histories through our own lens, and start conversations through different modes of art making. And now I'm going to just go through the workshops that we did. The goal of them was to reclaim history through our own imagery, language, and lived experiences. And if we go to the next slide. So one workshop, Reclaiming Power, which was a collective collaging workshop with Dorsey. That was a collaboration with a group called Dorsey, and they're a social and support group for South Asian and Middle Eastern LGBTQ plus people in Leicester. And in this workshop, we reflected on how South Asia had long recognized gender fluidity and queerness, and how the erasure relates to us reclaiming that history today. These histories and different prompts were laid out onto a large piece of fabric, and the idea was that each participant traced their own silhouettes, then filled in the gaps, layered, collaged, painted over it. And this was kind of symbolic of how interconnectedness, how interconnected the queer community is. And if we go to the next slide. So this then resulted in the creation of a tapestry that became almost like a collective portrait. So the idea was that the piece contrasts the more like singular static portrait of George Villiers with something that's very collective, layered, and expressive. And then the next slide. So this workshop was with the Leicester LGBTQ Centre's youth group in Hinckley, which explored self-portraits, and especially how we express our inner worlds through a portrait. So using silhouettes as a base, the young people were encouraged to rip, layer, paint, and draw into these given outlines, creating portraits that reflected themselves, again, to be something that's more expressive, personal, and kind of expressing like their own stories and narratives through a portrait. And then the next slide will show another workshop. So this one was an online workshop called Made in Our Image, and this allowed people to take part from home. A lot of participants preferred this space for reasons of visibility, safety, and access. So I mailed materials to everybody in a pack, and then we had an online session where each person created their own collage. And this was responding to the way our histories are usually represented for us. And it was about making, again, a kind of collage of our own identities from anywhere. And the last workshop was a poetry workshop, which was called The Stories That Speak Through Us. It was led by poet and facilitator Nikita Arshijada in collaboration with Queer Coffee Linkups, which is an intersectional poetry space based in Leicester. And this workshop resulted in a collective poem that became quite a big part of the exhibition. So the workshop went through histories of gender fluidity prior to colonialism. And then with this in mind, participants were led through writing prompts, and they then each contributed a line. So on the left image, you can see the lines flowing through the exhibition space. And on the right is a screenshot from the Zoom chat where everyone can put their lines in, and it kind of just became this poem. Together it just became like one shared poem that flowed through the whole space. And the next slide shows the exhibition artworks all together. So all of the workshops and outputs came together in the final artworks. So what you can see on the left is the artwork that I made called I Was Never Meant to Fit Inside These Lines. And it reimagines what portrait art can express and be. So it depicts a gender fluid figure layered with participants' collages, poetry, silhouettes, and it's almost like holding all of these community voices, both inside and beyond the lines. And then the next slide shows another piece of artwork. This one, Ebb and Flow, which was inspired by the lines from the collective poem, and also the histories of gender fluidity, which are layered throughout. So the idea of this is that it's charged with all the different voices very locally, but also globally, and showing how we connect with that. And the next slide shows everything in the exhibition space. So yeah, all the responses kind of bring in different genders, histories, voices, like all tied together through the poetry and artwork, with Villiers' portrait kind of at the center, like flowing through it, kind of showing that there's, I guess, histories surrounding it and beyond it. And we celebrated the exhibition and all those involved at Milton Carnegie Museum, where we had poetry curated by Queer Coffee Link-Ups, who were involved in a workshop, also a DJ. So this kind of just transformed the museum space into a space of queer joy and connection. I think it was a reminder that heritage is also about how we come together now and reclaim space in the present and what that means for the future. And lastly, on the next slide. So I think this project really calls for heritage spaces to make room for voices and stories that have always existed, even when erased or hidden. I think as queer people, we connect to history very differently. Sometimes it's almost like searching for traces of ourselves, creating new stories in gaps left behind. And making space for this to happen through collaboration and co-creation allows us to do that, especially to make visible what was unseen, to fill silences together, and to imagine futures that center us fully, because ultimately we have always been here and always will be.
I'm sorry, we were muted for some reason. So yeah, we've just stopped sharing because there's going to be a video now.
Great, thanks, Alison. That's good. We're just queuing that up.
Villiers revealed reframed queer lives not as marginal, but as integral to our shared history. It was a groundbreaking project for Culture Leicestershire, initiating changes in our service and centring on a newly restored portrait of George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham, at Milton Carnegie Museum.
This portrait in the exhibition started a conversation that brought together history, creativity and digital innovation. We explored George Villiers' life, his role in King James I's court, and the ways queer connections shaped history.
Our queer stories are not hidden footnotes. They have always been part of the narrative.
Through creative co-curation, artist Aaran Sian collaborated with LGBTQIA+ groups to produce We Have Always Been Here, a powerful exploration of identity and ancestry.
My work reimagined Villiers, blending past and present to show we've always existed and always resisted.
Community voices shape the exhibition at every stage. Student volunteers from the University of Nottingham contributed research, reflections and photogrammetry and co-created the digital exhibition.
Arts Council England is pleased to have been able to support the project, bringing the Villiers story to life.
It changed how we used our spaces and how people feel in them. We've had new audiences visiting and created new opportunities for our conversations about LGBTQ+ history.
This project demonstrates our commitment as a service to embed inclusivity, to be brave and to make lasting change.
We're not stopping here. We're using what we've learned to shape future projects and deepen community partnerships. I encourage you to explore the virtual exhibition and see history differently.
Well, thanks to all three of you for taking us on that really kind of expansive journey of really exciting community engagement and transformation of the organisation and your capacity and confidence to work differently all through that initial lens of the restored portrait. Fantastic work, thank you. So we're going to move into our third presentation from Aria Tilove, their talk is entitled Queering Nature, Reimagining Berlin's Natural History Museum through a guided tour and audio guide. So Aria, thanks very much for joining us. We'll hear your presentation and then we'll invite any questions or comments that we've got from the audience here and online. Aria, over to you.
Thank you. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yep, that's all clear.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so thanks so much for having me today. My name is Aria Tilove, and I use she, her pronouns, and I work in the Museum für Naturkunde, or the Museum of Natural History in Berlin, as a scientific researcher. And today I'll be presenting Queering Nature, an audio guide and guided tour that we offer that looks at nature, science, and the museum itself through a queer lens. I'll just get started by introducing you to one of our highlights in the museum, Tristan Otto, the T-Rex. And I don't expect anyone to actually answer this, but just as an activity to get us to start thinking in the way that the tour asks us to, I'd like you to have a guess as what sex you think Tristan Otto was. Maybe you have certain associations with that name, Tristan Otto. It actually was given to the fossil by the two owners of it, and they named it after their sons, so it doesn't have any relevance to the fossil itself. But maybe you also have certain associations with the image of a T-Rex, carnivorous, ferocious hunter that's often printed on boys' pajamas. Or maybe you're taking a look at Tristan's environment here, this cold, gray landscape that's rather angular, dark, rigid, arguably masculine-coded elements. And the truth of the matter is no one really knows what sex Tristan was. When we're talking about determining the sex of a dinosaur, we're talking about whether that animal lays eggs or not. And the only way that we could really determine which sex a T-Rex was would be if the dinosaur was carrying an egg at the moment it died and then it became fossilized. So as you can imagine, that would be extremely rare, yet assigning sex is a central activity that structures and organizes collections of natural history museums, with social relations reflected both in the collection practices and in their interpretation. So revealing these social norms and revealing the ways in which we interact with these objects in the museum is really a central aspect of Queering Nature, this guided tour and audio guide. And I'm going to go into some of the background detail of the tour now. So Queering Nature seeks to fill gaps in the exhibition and question social norms that also shape the natural sciences by troubling Eurocentric ideas of nature, science, and museal representation. It was developed by Dr. Tahani Nadim, who is a sociocultural anthropologist, and it was part of Museums and Society, Mapping the Social, which is a collaborative project between many universities and museums in Berlin. And then it was really important for the project to also work with external collaborators to bring in this critical new perspective to the museum. So we worked with Christian Miałczyk and Lubella Hutte, who both developed the script of the tour together, and then Lubella recorded the audio guide. And both of these people come from the social sciences and identify as non-binary, trans, bisexual, and queer themselves. And then Kees Otterlief served as a consultant on the script, and she also recorded the English audio guide, and Kees is a writer and queer ecologist herself. Just to give you some basic facts about the tour, it takes place throughout the entire permanent exhibition, and there's 9 stations throughout the museum. It lasts about 90 minutes for the live version, and then there's also the audio guide. And both formats are available in English and German. And it's offered as a public tour about bi-monthly, as well as a tour that can be booked for private groups, and it's aimed at young people and adults. Now, I will not have time in the remaining 10 minutes or so to go through all of the different themes that the tour touches, because it's really vast in its scope, and it takes a very interdisciplinary and intersectional perspective on queering nature and science in the museum. And it also brings in a lot of contemporary artistic and activist practice as well. But I will link to the audio guide at the end of my presentation, which of course you're welcome to visit us in Berlin, but you can also listen to the audio guide without being in the museum itself and listen to all of this really wonderful research and stories that it includes. But just to give you a taste of everything that it covers, it talks about things like kinship structures, intersexness and disability, botany and colonialism, animal sexual behavior and sexual morality, sex determination and sexual dimorphism, sexual behavior among animals that does not lead to reproduction, fluidity of sex and gender, and the symbolic power of animals. And for my remaining time, I'm just going to go through some of the stations that are a bit easier to break down in this format and for the time that we have left. So the first station is addressing some penguins that we have on our biodiversity wall, and it includes the research from George Murray Levick, who was a British researcher at the beginning of the 20th century, looking at Adelie penguins in Antarctica. And he had extensive research and observed, among many things, sex, not only between male adult penguins and female penguins, but also same-sex relations, masturbation, non-reproductive sexual behavior, and sex with dead penguins and chicks. And Levick was so scandalized by these observations that he decided to encode his research in Greek letters to limit who would be able to read and access the information, since he viewed it as depraved and abnormal. And this actually was quite a common practice in the natural and social sciences in the 19th and early 20th century to censor sexually charged findings. And interestingly, the findings were not fully published until 2011, so about 100 years after they were initially observed. So this bit of history really deconstructs the idea of science as inherently neutral, because it reveals just how much the positionality, and in this case, the sexual morals of the researcher, can inform what questions are asked, how the data are interpreted, and ultimately what is communicated in the end. Next, we'll go to our hippo display. Maybe you're looking at this and seeing a little baby hippo, maybe a mommy hippo and a dad hippo, I don't know. It's funny because hippos don't actually live like this. They're mainly solitary animals that live in loose groups of 10 to 15 animals. They often have several females and one male. And what's interesting about this station is that it asks us to question not only the idea of the nuclear family as the natural way of living together, because nature shows us many different ways that animals coexist and cohabitate through schools, herds, packs, flocks, and colonies. But it also has another layer of questioning representation in the museum, and how arranging hippos like this may invoke certain connotations or social meaning when not properly contextualized or problematized like they are through Queering Nature, this tour. Lastly, I'll talk about the parrotfish, who is part of our coral reef display in the museum. And parrotfish are really interesting because they're not only key for the health of coral reefs, but they also change their sex over the course of their lives. So some start as neither male or female, whereas some begin as female and later change to male as they mature. And this is so common among parrotfish that scientists have a word to describe species that do not have fluid sexes, gonochoristic. And it's really common among coral fish species in general to change their sex. About a quarter have been cited to do so. And again, this could simply be as part of the aging process. And for others, it's socially triggered. For example, if they live together in a group where it's predominantly females and one single male, if the male dies, one female would replace him by expressing different genes and therefore producing different hormones and changing sexes. So through this example, it's clear that the rigid division between sexes is not necessarily the norm in nature and perhaps is more of a human convention than anything else. So I'll just wrap up here by talking about some of the key considerations and future directions that we have planned. I tailored these considerations specifically to share about things that popped up in our setting as a natural history museum, since I thought maybe that would be interesting for today's symposium and perhaps bring in a different perspective. So one of the main do's would be to challenge assumptions, binaries, and neutrality in science. This, we can link back to the example of Levick and the penguins, where really the positionality of the researcher informed how certain behaviors were observed, what was deemed as abnormal or depraved, and then ultimately what was communicated to the greater public. And I think it's important. I'm a social scientist. That's the training that I've had. And I think in the social sciences, it's quite integral to the research process to think about one's positionality and how that's informing the research methodology. And I think in natural sciences, maybe there's more of an assumption that there's a black and white between facts or non-facts. And of course, there's a lot of rigorous science, but I think it's also important to bring in some of these questions also within the natural sciences. Another do would be to explain terms, particularly those used in biology, that should not be used for human identity or behavior. So for example, there are terms that are used to describe animal behavior or anatomy in the natural sciences and in biology that would not be appropriate to use for humans. For example, we use the word intersex when talking about human anatomy or identity, and there's other terms to describe that among animals that would not be appropriate, and it's just important as part of the tour to make that distinction when talking about these things. And then a don't would be to try and normalize queer, and I think this comes up in maybe different projects in different ways. For our project, this was important to not necessarily use animal behavior and what's seen in the animal world to justify human identity or sexuality. So for example, again, with the penguins, with Levick's research, we could say, okay, well, we have evidence of same-sex relations among penguins, therefore it's normal and natural that there's same-sex relationship amongst humans. But if we remember, Levick also was cited that there was sex between adults and chicks and sex between with dead penguins. So really the point of the tour is not to justify human identity or behavior. We don't believe that we need to do that, but rather the tour is to really question the idea of normativity in general and to show that really there is no norm in nature because nature is so diverse. And the idea maybe of what's normal or natural is really more of a human convention than something that we can derive from nature. For the following steps, we're working on training further guides for the tour. Right now, the tour is just conducted by those who were involved in the development of it, so Christian, Lubella, and Case. But we have definite interest among our larger guide team. Our guides are primarily trained in the natural sciences, so there is a learning curve when it comes to this new thematic scope, and also with the confidence to be able to have certain dialogues or conversations that could come up from the tour. And then lastly, we also are working on developing a version for younger groups, for school groups, primary school children, for example, because right now the tour is quite academic, and we want to be able to create a version that's a bit more accessible and yeah, for school children as well. And I'll just have my last slide here. This is the link to the audio guide, which I can also share in the chat. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention. There's also my email if you have any questions or want to get in touch, or if you're in Berlin and want to visit. Thank you.